Hi, Mike Ferrentino, Santa Cruz Bicycles, Marketing Stooge, Las Vegas, Interbike, 2010. This is 21 Interbikes for me. 21. Anyway, after that little brief note of heartbreak, let's talk about some bikes. Big news for us this year, probably the biggest of what we've been working on for the last year, is this little beauty, the V10 Carbon Fiber. We spent an inordinate amount of time and energy developing this thing, and getting it to market has proven to be a monumental undertaking. The old V10 out of aluminum was a good bike. It was tried and true performer, World Cup winner, World Championship winner. At the same time, what we'd been learning from carbon fiber when we started in initially with the Blur XC, then the Blur LT Carbon, and the Nomad, was just that the strength gains and performance gains we could get out of the material were too hard to pass up. There's a lot of skepticism out there about carbon fiber, about its ability to take abuse, but as we were going through the other bikes, finding out that if you build them right, they take abuse. They take tons of abuse. They can take more abuse than an aluminum bike will. So we ended up deciding that this is what we wanted to do. It's lighter than the old V10 by a pound, still using an aluminum swing arm, but we were able to pull a pound of weight out of it and at the same time create a much stronger bike than we initially had. The old V10 was by no means a weak or fragile bike, but we're getting to the point now where we're having to reconfigure our test equipment because we're no longer capable of braking these things the way we used to be able to brake them. So it's strong. If you're looking at a cutaway of the frame, underneath the bottom side of the down tube at the head tube juncture here, we're getting close to probably 8 millimeters, close to a centimeter of just layer upon layer upon layer of carbon fiber along the downside of the down tube here. The neat thing about the material is we're using a one-piece proprietary molding process. We've gone through this in years past in these fun videos where we have all of the shock mounts are molded into the process. The pivot hardware, or the pivot mounts, are part of the molding process. Clamp it all together in one mold. We have really precise control over how thick we're making the material, where we're placing the material, and that is the key to developing these really lightweight, incredibly strong structures. What we're looking at here is Greg Minnaar's World Cup bike from this year. Ended up second overall in the World Cup, third at the World Championships. A lot of people are probably really stoked with those results. Personally, I think it's fantastic. Greg's probably not too happy about it, but Greg's kind of a perfectionist. This is very close to what the Syndicate Replica V10 will be that we're offering. This paint job without the Greg Minnaar One Life South Africa joy, but otherwise almost identical spec. The carbon raw, aluminum raw one we showed you was one other color option. We're working on a final color that's still to be reviewed and released, but then we'll have essentially Syndicate Replica. In every respect, it's what these guys were racing on this year. Back in spring, we launched our APP suspension line in the form of two different bikes, the Butcher and the Nickel. The Butcher, seen here, 150 millimeter travels, APP suspension. In case the cliff notes of that didn't get out the first time, single pivot suspension, same as we've used on our Superlight and our Heckler and our Bullet for years. Single pivot suspensions have a lot going for them. They're really simple, they're really reliable. The way we have our pivot placement on these is optimized to actually pedal pretty nicely most of the time. The only sort of pedal feedback you'll get out of it is it has a slight tendency to want to top out when you're in your granny ring. For the smaller your chain ring, the bigger your rear cog, the more your chain is kind of pulling away from the center line of the pivot here, and that tends to make it sort of top out a teeny bit. But that's about the worst you can say for it. It's a pretty efficient, effective, well-behaved suspension design. It was just beginning to lack, as a single pivot, was beginning to lack the sophistication that some of the linkage-driven bikes that are out there are offering these days. So, an experiment that we started several years ago in seeing if we could isolate the suspension forces of VPP suspension. Shock rate on our VPP essentially is a smiley face. Falls at the beginning of travel, flattens out, and then rises at the end of travel. What that does is it gives you really nice falling away small bump compliance. The suspension's buttery smooth, then it firms up a little bit, and then it ramps up at the end of travel to give you some bottom out resistance. With VPP, we achieve that with a pair of counter-rotating links and an isolated rear triangle. It's it gives you some really neat instant center migration characteristics and some good pedaling dynamics as well that you can't necessarily take advantage of with a single pivot bike. But we were able to get the shock rate adapted into what the final form was, is this pair of links right here. And this effectively changes the speed at which the shock is being driven as the rear wheel goes through its travel, and does the same little smiley face thing. So if you were to compare this to a Heckler, same amount of travel, this is going to come across with a little more supple beginning stroke, and it's going to have a better ability to ramp up at the end of stroke and prevent bottom out. Ride them side by side, the suspension on this feels rad. I mean, this thing feels like a Nomad in terms of how it eats bumps. But it's a simple single pivot, and it costs a whole lot less than a VPP bike because it's easier for us to manufacture. Retail price, frame and shock starts at $1,350. You can get complete bikes starting at just under $2,000. The nickel, also APP suspension. Very much a new bike for us otherwise though. 125 millimeter travel. The Butcher, if you look at it, is like the Heckler, like the Blur LT. The cockpits on those things all feel very similar. Same sort of top tube lengths, same sort of chassis for a given size. The nickel is a little more stretched out in this top tube. It still runs a pretty slack head angle on it. I think we're 68.5 degrees on that with a 130 fork, but don't quote me yet, I could be wrong. It might be 68. But we're running a longer top tube, so it's more in line with the XC and the Tallboy in terms of how you fit on the cockpit of the bike. Both the nickel and the Butcher, you see, have taper head tubes, so we're running an inset upper cup and 1.5 lower. Allows you to take advantage of taper forks, or if you still want to run 1 1/8 forks, you can even run an inset lower to drop the front of your bike a tiny bit. Both of them hydroform tubing throughout. They're good stuff. While we were talking about VPP, carbon fiber radness, and APP stuff, a lot of questions that have come up over the course of this year being like, what's happening to the single pivots? Are you going to get rid of the single pivot bikes? It's like, no. Single pivot bikes still offer a lot for a lot of riders. And in the instance of what we're trying to do, they offer a lot of bang for the buck. So the Heckler and Superlight are remaining in the line. The Heckler is, as she has always been, 150 millimeter travel. It's one of the more enjoyable handling bikes out there. People across the board are just loyal to that bike for years. They love the Heckler. But we've managed to do a few things. Because we've been able to take advantage of some new aluminum shaping and forming, we've got some different tubing going on here. Still aluminum, but we've got different butting and different structure on the interior of the tubes that allowed us to increase strength and at the same time get rid of the gussets that we used to have that were sort of a signature. People love gussets, but gussets are one of those things that you do if you have to, if there's no other option. Because we were able to get some tubing that eliminated the need for gussets and still gave us the strength and the ride characteristics we wanted, gussets went bye-bye. What that means is less labor to make a frame. Less labor to make a frame means cost less. So, gussets go bye-bye. We take the new pivot hardware again, so once again we're dealing with this really cool large diameter aluminum axle that threads through the frame, threads into this side, and then a locking collet head that expands a wedge on this side, holds the whole thing together. We've got angular contact bearings in there. Clean, simple, super reliable setup. And it's because we're using a lot of hardware that we've already developed and worked on, we're able to keep some of the hardware costs down. We don't have to slap gussets on it. Frame price dropped. We've got a few new finishes coming in this year. Raw. I think we're actually calling it bare. Initially, for a few years now, we've wanted to do just a straight aluminum finish. So on some of our bikes, we're going to be offering this year. It's not, you know, it's basically it's a aluminum frame. We run the decals on it, we brush it, run decals, and then we put a clear coat over it. Nothing more than that. You know, it's not every day that I get to say bold new graphics or the word colorways. But that's what we got with the Blur XC. We're not messing with it too much at the moment. The bike weighs 4.5 pounds, frame and shock. That's close to class leading weight for a cross-country race bike, especially a 100 mil travel bike. These things are strong and light, and they've developed a really good following. It's an amazing bike. We are updating graphics on them. So we're going to be offering it in this beautiful, pretty red, gloss red, and then we're going to have two different matte carbon finishes. One is going to be sort of a stealth, almost as close to murdered out as you'll be able to get. Matte carbon finish, a lot like you can see on that Tallboy over there. with a silver decal and nothing else. The other one's going to be a matte carbon finish with a blue and silver decal way that'll have a little bit of stripe to it like this, but still be pretty quiet compared to the gloss of the red. Moving over, we got some stuff going on with the LTs as well. The LT Carbon has also had a bit of a graphics upgrade from what it used to have. Previously had that asymmetric paint job that was a love-hate affair for some people. I personally like it, but I like what we're doing now. So we're going to have this sort of candy apple green thing here with a green and black color, and then we're also offering it in, come on, work with me here, white and, yeah. Also, going for the murdered out thing. We got a matte carbon one with just Santa Cruz logo and nothing else going on. That's going to be pretty close to a wrap, I think. We're going to have to say goodbye from scenic Santa Cruz Towers. Get out of the way, Marshall. What are you doing there? Jesus. Santa Cruz bikes. You also notice we have a booth. This is kind of the first time we've had an indoor booth in like 7 years. And it's the last time this show's going to be in Vegas. Doesn't everyone love Vegas? I know I don't. Instead, we get to go to Anaheim. Does anyone love Anaheim? I don't. It's a small world after all. Thank you for watching.